we have in our house.
Can I talk?
All right, in this week's segment, Nick has an issue with a member of his tribe. We're going to get to that in a second. And I have an issue with somebody calling out my people in the Bronx. So, Nick, I'm going to let you go first. 5 minutes is all yours to talk about the man they like to call Vivek Ramaswamy.
Last week, and it's now been pretty publicly available at this point, Vivek has a show, a podcast, but there's a YouTube component of it called Truth. Insert joke there. On the show, he leads off with a monologue and then brings on a guest. His most recent guest, of course, was noted conservative pundit, punching bag, whatever you want to call her, Ann Coulter. At the start of their interview, it took an interesting turn for racial politics, and we heard the following.
So I brought on today somebody who I think has some thoughtful perspectives on the future direction of our country, of our conservative movement, and on this question of nationalism and national identity, somebody I've been fascinated by for a long time and have interacted with on social media, but for the first time we're having at least live form conversation in the offline sense of it. It's Ann Coulter. So Ann, thanks for coming on, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Me too. Thanks for having me. That was a fantastic opening monologue. I too am a fan of yours. So I'm going to make a point of disagreeing with you so that it will be fun. You are so bright and articulate, and I guess I can call you articulate since you're not an American Black. Can't say that about them. That's derogatory. And that was a great opening segment. Lots of things to talk about there. Oh, and I agreed with many, many things you said during, in fact, probably more than most other candidates when you were running for president. But I still would not have voted for you because you're an Indian. We'll get back to that.
When someone decides to be an outright bigot, that person doesn't get the yada yada their way through it. When you say, well, I wouldn't vote for you because of your ethnicity, but we'll get back to that. No, you gargoyle. We're going to stop right here and we're going to have a conversation. So first off, this is why Vivek's no longer allowed at the meetings, by the way. And I say that jokingly about Indian people, but there's not many Indian people I talk to who are fans of Vivek. You know, it's one thing to desperately cling to whiteness and to try to be white adjacent. It's quite another to have someone on your show openly insult you to your face and then proceed to have a conversation. You could talk to Ann Coulter all you want, but if she's going to lead off and say, I'm not going to vote for you because of your race. And oftentimes conservatives like to mince words about racism. Is it actually racist? Was it implied? This is the type of rhetoric or rhetorical skill that someone like Ben Shapiro likes to play in the sandbox with. This one was just naked racism. What Mike just played is not an edited clip. You can actually go to the YouTube clip or the YouTube episode and just listen to the whole thing. And she does indeed lead with, well, I wouldn't vote for you because you're Indian. At that point, it's on Vivek as just having a decency to stop and say, can we just talk about that for a second? Or like we do on the show, can we please talk? But to just let that pass, shame on you, man. I believe he's a first generation Indian like I am. And it is incomprehensible to me to have someone say to your face that I discredit you because of who you are. To Vivek's credit, Harvard graduate, extremely wealthy, by all measures, as an American citizen, extremely successful. What is Ann Coulter, other than a punching bag at the average roast by someone like Jeff Ross? There's really nothing of accomplishment for her. Somehow she manages to get her face on Bill Maher's couch every couple episodes of Real Time, and she does the rounds. But there's nothing of success to note for this individual. But simply because Vivek is an Indian, she couldn't vote for him. Who gives a damn who she would vote for? This is what I mean when I talk about people who have unserious people on their show. And that's exactly what we saw. Later in that interview, Ann decides to go from insulting Indians to Catholics. You listen later on, she'll then say about American Catholics that American Catholics have become Protestant. Really? Sure. You sure about that? I know plenty of American Catholics who don't consider themselves as such. But she was playing the racial politics of what it means to be a WASP in America. Later on, perhaps one of my favorite segments as a student of history, they had an exchange about what it means to be a citizen. And they both agreed that citizenship at one point meant loyalty. Vivek, actually in the interview, talks about, before citizenship was, and these were his words, about what I get. It was about who I am and what I represent to where I live. And then Anne, of course, being a white supremacist, basically says that it's not about what your area gives to you, but what you contribute to it. And they both agree by the Roman definition of citizenship, it wasn't even about having the privilege to vote. I'm sorry, if I don't have the ability to vote, how can you ever consider me a citizen? And I would ask Vivek, when Indians did not have the ability to vote for members of British Parliament, even though we were a colony, would you have considered us citizens? Vivek has always been frustrating to listen to. He's always sounded rehearsed. It's in many ways why he's not the candidate, but also in many ways is because of what Ann said. There are a sizable number of Republicans who would not have voted Vivek simply because he's an Indian. And what I would ask Vivek, if I were to talk to him, and maybe we have him on the show, is why do you continue to cozy up to racists?
All right, sir, you got to call out your person of the week and get that off your chest. Now let me call out my person of the week. Listen, if you missed a few weeks ago, or it may have been a week ago or so, as of this recording, New York Governor Kathy Hochul made a statement as she was doing a panel. And I forget what the panel was in reference to, but she started talking about inner city, specifically the Bronx and public schools in the Bronx, and talking about African Americans and Blacks that live in the Bronx. And I mean, they don't know what computers are. Take a listen to this.
Young Black kids growing up in the Bronx who don't even know what the word computer is. They don't know. They don't know these things. And I want the world open up to all of them, because when you have their diverse voices innovating solutions through technology, then you're really addressing society's broader challenges.
All right. So a couple of things here. You can tell by my complexion, I'm maybe part of the tribe. I'm like a quarter, my dad's Afro-Cuban. So I'm going to stand up for the African-American community. All right. Even though I am a pseudo member of it, let's say. But also, I'm from the Bronx. I'm one of those kids that she referenced in terms of talking about kids in the Bronx don't know what computers are. In 1993, Carlos Leon, my father, worked with Our Lady of Nativity and the school district out on 233rd in the east side of the Bronx to be able to put computers and create a computer lab for this school district. Okay, so 30 computers, CPUs with the monitors, keyboards, getting this inside of a school district for the first time in a long time. That, when computers, in the advent of computers back in 93 and 94, they were just starting to come around, and some of these schools did not have the funding to be able to set up computers. My dad did this as a side job. So he went around to different school districts in the Bronx, because obviously we lived on 238th and Byron Avenue in the Bronx, is where I grew up. And my dad went around to a couple school districts there, including St. Francis of Rome, where I ended up going for middle school, PS 16, where I did, K through fourth grade, and setting up these schools. And more importantly, to have computer labs, to have the ability to give kids the advantage to use the computers at school, to learn typing and some of these other things. So I come at this story from a different angle, because normally Nick is the education guy on here. Nick can speak to about the education and the disadvantages of teaching in the public schools of New York City versus teaching in Westchester County, for example. So I don't want to break it up too much into the education realm. But I do want to make this a little bit personal, because Kathy Hochul said something that I think is so problematic with the progressive left. And I'm stealing this from somebody that I saw on Twitter say this. And they said, just let somebody on the left, on the progressive left, talk to you about racism. And after you hear them talk, you may end up being a conservative. And I remember seeing that tweet posted somewhere. And then I heard Kathy Hochul, who I think is well-intentioned in terms of talking about the problem. She's just addressing it wrong. And then threw, oh, by the way, a slight jab at African Americans not knowing anything about computers. They all have smartphones, these kids in schools. Of course they know about computers. They're walking around with one in their pocket. But more importantly, if you really want to tackle the challenges that are facing not only African Americans and Latinos in the Bronx, let's talk about the economic disadvantages. When Nick and I first started the show, in the third episode, I asked Nick about systemic racism in schools. And what I mean about systemic racism is looking at the entirety of the situation. I lived on 238th and Byron Avenue. The schools that I went to were in the bottom half of the state. Student to teacher ratio was 13-1. The average salary in the area is around $40,000 to $45,000 a year. Schools are in the bottom. And within a 2.5-mile radius of my school and my house, foods and high trans fats are sold in that area, from Burger King to Taco Bell, all these processed food places. It wasn't until my dad in 1994 moved us up to Westchester County and Harrison High School, 45 minutes north. And do you know the percentage of people living there that are African American and Latino? It's under 12%. In the Bronx, it was 90%. The teacher to student ratio is less, 9-1. The average salary, $75,000 a year and more. The schools ranked in the top 250 nationally, top 25 in the state of New York, just 45 minutes north. So if you truly want to address the problems, Kathy Hochul, let's start by looking at the actual rankings of the schools and looking at the economic disadvantages in those communities. This isn't rocket science. I don't even work in education, but I just solved the problem for you. And more importantly, I did it all using my computer.